Welcome to the Title IV Part A, Subpart 1, Student Support and Academic Enrichment, LEA Random Validation Training for October 2021. I am Lenitra Guess, Program Director for Title IV Part A programs in the Texas Education Agency's Federal Program Compliance Division. This presentation will provide a brief overview of the Title IV Part A program purpose, the evaluation of program effectiveness validation indicators, and the documentation submission process to TEA. The random validation for 21-22 will request documentation for 2 selected program requirements. However, a district must ensure it has documentation on file for all Title IV Part A program requirements. Documentation overall compliance for a program requirement may require several forms of documentation to be maintained locally and available upon request by TEA and/or an auditor. To ensure overall compliance with program requirements, LEAs should refer to the program guide and/or other program-related resources that reference the multiple forms of documentation required to be maintained locally. The documentation requested for submission during the random validation process may not include all forms of documentation that are required to be maintained locally. Please note that due to COVID-19, documentation for virtual meetings is an acceptable form of documentation. Given the increased use of virtual meeting environments, participant rosters that include the meeting title, meeting date, and stakeholder names and roles would be acceptable substitutes for the more traditional sign-in sheets. This eliminates the need of a participant signature. The Title IV Part A grants are designed to improve the academic achievement of all students by increasing the capacity of LEAs, schools, and communities to provide all students with access to a well-rounded education, improve school conditions for student learning and safe and healthy students, and to improve technology in order to enhance academic outcomes and digital literacy of all students. For the 21-22 school year, selected LEAs must provide the latest evaluation of program effectiveness supported with Title IV Part A funds. LEAs should review the 21-22 Random Handbook for the Title IV Part A validation requirements, evaluation of program effectiveness, additional TEA guidance, and submission instructions. LEAs will complete applicable sections of the submission packet, include relevant documentation, and follow the Random Validation Handbook instructions to upload documents through the ESA Reports application on TEAL no later than November 12, 2021. The ESA Title IV Part A, Section 4106E1E citation states, each application submitted under this section by an LEA or a consortium of such agencies shall include the following: a description of the activities and programming that the LEA or consortium of such agencies will carry out under this subpart, including a description of the program objectives and intended outcomes for activities under Title IV Part A, and how the LEA or consortium of such agencies will periodically evaluate the effectiveness of the activities carried out under Title IV Part A based on such objectives and outcomes. Assurances related to the Title IV Part A program listed as number 12 on the ESA Consolidated Application, Title IV Program-Specific Provisions and Assurances states, the LEA will periodically evaluate the effectiveness of the activities carried out to support the program objectives and intended outcomes. On the 2021 through 2022 LEA Compliance Report, one of the LEA program compliance self-check items states, the LEA periodically evaluated the effectiveness of the Title IV Part A programs and/or activities based on the objectives and outcomes. LEAs should refer to the program guide and/or other program-related resources that reference the multiple forms of documentation required to be maintained locally. The documentation requested for submission during the random validation process may not include all forms of documentation that are required to be maintained locally. Please include the most recent description of the process to evaluate effectiveness of Title IV Part A funded activities aligned to the program objectives and intended outcomes with the selected documentation and completed submission packet to demonstrate compliance with the program requirement described below. Relevant pages of the most current District Improvement Plan or other official auditable documentation that provides a description, including LEA's Title IV Part A evaluation process, how the LEA will periodically evaluate the effectiveness, Title IV Part A program objectives, and Title IV Part A intended outcomes of funding programs and activities. In addition, documentation should include relevant sign-in sheets and/or meeting agendas of stakeholder consultation meetings with identified names and roles pertaining to the evaluation of effectiveness in Title IV Part A funded activities and/or programs. The standard meeting documentation that an LEA should maintain locally includes dated meeting agendas, meeting notes or minutes, and sign-in sheets. The LEA must submit only the relevant pages of the most current LEA's District Improvement Plan of activities or other official auditable documentation with the latest evaluation on how Title IV Part A funds support one of the content areas, well-rounded education, safe and healthy students, or effective use of technology. If additional documentation is submitted that is not aligned with the random validation indicator, TEA may discover additional areas in which the LEA is not compliant and must follow up. Issues that may result in an improvement needed status are auditable documentation requested was not submitted, documentation submitted does not describe the LEA's evaluation process, documentation submitted does not include meeting agendas of stakeholder consultation meetings pertinent to the evaluation, documentation submitted does not align to the requested evaluation of program effectiveness documentation. This is the timeline for LEAs selected for Title IV Part A random validation in 2021 through 2022. Selected LEAs will be notified on October 4th, 2021. The deadline for an LEA to submit documentation through ESA reports is on November 12th. The LEA will receive notification of validation results in April 2022. ESC staff will contact the LEA to provide technical assistance from the start date of the LEA notification, which is October 4th, through November 11th prior to submitting documentation to the Texas Education Agency. This presentation is intended solely to provide general information and guidance to Texas ESCs, LEAs, private nonprofit school officials, and other stakeholders, and reflect the Texas Education Agency's current understanding of the ESA statute and applicable federal guidance. The content of this presentation is subject to change as a result of further potential information and guidance provided by federal agencies with regulatory oversight of ESA programs. This presentation does not constitute legal advice, and participants are therefore advised to seek legal counsel regarding the information and guidance provided in this presentation before acting on such information and guidance. The Federal Program Compliance Division contact information is listed on this slide. If you have additional questions or need further assistance, please email isasupport@tea.texas.gov. Thank you for listening to this presentation and have a wonderful day.